you've ever felt overwhelmed by property reports, market stats or data dashboards, you'll want to bookmark this episode. We're breaking down property data in a way that's practical and easy to understand. Today we're unpacking individual property data and broader market data, including growth, trends, historical insights, what stats to pay attention to, what to ignore, and how much they should influence decision making in today's property market. In Season 3, we're guided by listener questions. Here's one we've received. So many institutes and organisations provide property data with regular reports and research coming out, but the numbers often seem to differ. How do people know which ones to follow to get the closest representation of what's really happening in the market? Is there not just one way things should be measured? To help me unpack this, I'm joined by Brendon Ptolomey, Managing Director at Herron Todd White in WA. He's an established property analyst and a well-known media commentator. Brendon, great to have you today.
Thanks for having me, Damian.
Good to see you. Now, property data, I remember back in the old days, you and I have been around for a little while. There used to be, I think, one set of data come out every quarter and talk about the median price. It was a lift out in the paper.
Yes.
But now we're getting regular data. There's Cotality, there's realestate.com, there's the local institutes providing data. Domain is another one, and they all seem to come out with different numbers. So do you know what goes into those numbers and why you think they're different?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. We live in a data-rich society now. And I do go back far enough that we were getting our information off microfiche. We would literally scribble it down with a pen and paper. Nowadays, that data is pretty much instant. So the moment that a real estate agent does a transaction and uploads that information to one of their websites, it'll be slurped up by one of those organisations that you just talked about. So the one that valuers use, and probably a lot of the country use, is Cotality. And so in that data, you'll be able to see settled sales advice, recent sales advice. They're different colours in terms of the way they're presented, but it's very instantaneous in terms of the results that have just happened in the last weekend or so. So data's gone from being, in the old days, we're waiting 3 months for sales to settle and the data to come through the system. Now it's pretty much instantaneous the weekend after. Now, in terms of the different types of data, so you've just seen by that example that there's one provider that's very much instantaneous. They're a company that sells data into the marketplace, Cotality, big American company. Other people provide data through, say, REWA, so an organisation of real estate agents, where they're slurping that data up from their agents, their member society, and essentially using that to inform the market, as well as their own constituents, as to what's happening in the marketplace. Now, each of them have a different median house price, and this probably is where it gets really confusing for people out there in the marketplace. They see one number for, say, a large city, take Perth, for example. As the market has moved up to a level of $1 million, it's a headline number in the marketplace. Suddenly you've got one provider calling it first. So I think it was PropTrack or Domain. We're first to say Perth's going to go to $1 million. Then REWA are still at a number that's much less than that, $850,000 at exactly the same time. And then Cotality are a number more like $960,000, just trying to illustrate the difference between those numbers. And essentially they're all using slightly different statistical models to get their answer. I really like the REWA one because it's been around for a really long period of time. And essentially it is a median house price. So it is describing the middle of the market. So essentially there's been transactions at the top end, there's been transactions at the bottom end of the market, and we're going to tell you what it is in the middle of the marketplace in that particular location at that point in time.
Yeah, and look, certainly they do. I know when from the real estate institutes, they often run a rolling median, so it's including sales from 6, 9, 12 months ago, whereas I think the Cotality one, they've got their secret herbs and spices, as I call it, their formula, algorithms that try and value every single property every day. So I think that's one of the reasons why they come out differently. But of course, if you're a buyer in the market and you're looking for data on an overall basis, a city data, how do you assess that? Well, I mean, they're telling us different numbers and different growth rates even. I do notice the growth rates are different. How do you know what's really going on?
Yes, so looking at all of the data sets if you can, again, we're a data-rich society now, you might as well take it all in. But then you need to get pretty granular. So if you're going to a certain suburb across Australia, the best people to go and talk to really are those local real estate agents. They're clearly working for the people that are trying to sell the house, or they are trying to sell the asset and get the maximum price. but they're at least going to give you some guide as to where they think that number is. But then you want to go and find out what actually the property sold for. So you can actually go to, say, the Cotality website. You can go to, say, the Real Estate Institute websites and find out what properties actually sold for. One of the interesting things being a valuer is that we often go into people's houses and inspect their house for their valuation. They'll tell us that the place down the road sold for a maximum number that they're really impressed with. Then we look at our sales evidence that we have there, the settled sales, and we'll say, oh, hang on, that's not right. The place down the road did not sell for $1.5 million, it sold for $1.3 million. So what I'm saying here is you need to go and find out the facts of what the actual sales prices are in that location.
Yeah, neighbourhood rumours, people always talk it up. I've never seen a homeowner talk down the value of their property, do they? Always talk it up, they want that maximum value.
Absolutely, they've got to still maybe come back to the barbecue in that neighbourhood or their street, and they need to be able to hold their head high.
Now, when you obviously the national data is all about the cities and what's happening in those cities, but of course within those cities, property prices do vary. There's some that perform better than others, and sometimes I look at the suburb data, particularly when it's a median and maybe there's only 30, 40 sales. Sometimes my take on that is it doesn't necessarily represent what's really going on. In fact, in a suburb that both you and I live in, there's the median price one year in the last couple of years went down.
Yes.
I'm thinking that didn't really happen to me. So how do you assess the local data, apart from going to talking to the local agents? You can't really necessarily just rely on what's the reported median per house price change, can you?
So those statistical models are often relying on a certain number of sales in a suburb, and they're built on the concept that most suburbs in Australia are of a certain size and will have a number of transactions per month. Therefore, you get a result. In those smaller suburbs around the country, you do end up with these outliers where if there's one sale at the top of the market, another sale at the median market, and another sale down towards the bottom, then you're going to end up with a skewed number for a period of time. So again, what you need to do then is go back through those sales that you can find within the locality and make sure you understand what things have sold for. Then you might want to break down that sales number. So was that a land value type sale? And can I divide the land value into the sale price and start working out things like rates per square metre and essentially enriching your own data and your decision making around where you think the value in that suburb's coming from.
And running a national firm and being involved with a national firm, do you find many buyers get valuations prior to placing offers, or is it almost an afterthought? Hopefully the valuer matches what I've paid for it.
Yeah, I'm smiling because it's over 30 odd years of doing this. I'm still bemused that more people don't come to valuers before they go and make a purchase decision. I guess we haven't made ourselves as a profession that easy to deal with in terms of our black and white analysis of a property. And what valuers typically do is take out the emotive factor in terms of buying. So often we'll try and do a valuation before purchase and people kind of don't like our answers, so to speak. And it doesn't often put them in the best position to go and make their highest value. And I'm really kind of being honest about maybe valuers dragging things down a little bit because they're so black and white in their answers and their analysis. So I am surprised that more people don't get a val done. In this day and age, buyer agents are extremely active across the country. And so that's probably a pathway that the marketplace has decided is a better way for them to go. I can tell you a buyer agent earns a lot more in a purchase of a transaction or a transaction of a property than a valuer does. But obviously they're enriching with other data and other information and other market insights.
Yeah. And valuations, they've changed over the years, certainly going back again 20, 30 years. There used to be full valuations, my recollection is, and now there's all these different types of valuations that you do as a professional firm. So just run through all those different valuation types, because there's curbside or drive-by, desktop, and just run through. And when you're buying a property, which one are you likely to get? I guess what factors into that?
Yeah. So interesting you mentioned curbside first, because they literally have been thrown down on the curbside. They're not done anymore, really. There's most of the major banks in Australia aren't using those anymore, essentially because they think there's a better way to do that. And one of the replacements is a desktop valuation, and it literally is what it sounds like. A valuer sitting at their desk or at their computer and analysing data that's been presented to them. So essentially the data set, as in sales evidence for that location, will have been matched to the subject property, and the valuers then using their expertise of transactions in that location and assessing the difference between those other comparable sales to work out the desktop value. Now that's got a leeway effect in it. So the lending institution understands that it's essentially an estimate of the value. So it's not seen as a full valuation of the property. There's something else out there called a Smart Val, which is a branded product that comes through Cotality. And so that's actually trying to enrich some of that desktop data. So you go to a new level where you phone the person who owns the house or the tenant that lives there, and you're using the data that you can see online. So there's often photos of the house inside, outside, that type of stuff, and you're verifying that data with the person that you end up talking to. And then you're investigating your sales evidence more thoroughly to come up with a better answer, or a more accurate answer, I should say. And then the full valuation, which is a Property Pro finance valuation. It's a standard across Australia. And that's where the valuer comes to your house, inspects the property, wants to have a look in every single room, front and back, and is doing a full risk assessment for the bank, which becomes a really major component of that inspection. So essentially the bank's probably doing that because it might be a purchase price and they don't have any data on that property. It might be a high LVR, loan to value ratio, so they want to decrease their risk effect on lending on that property. Or they might think that there's some sort of risk to it. So they may have done an overlay on it and seen that there's, say, power lines, it's in a bushfire zone, there's some transport routes nearby, and they would like someone to go and essentially eyeball the property. Now, when you purchase a property, a lot of this is computer generated answers as to which type of valuation you'll get. And so essentially, if you've got a high LVR, it's a very high likelihood that you will get a full valuation. Lower the LVR, the less likelihood that you'll get a human valuation. You'll actually get probably a computer generated valuation. That's called an automated valuation model. And so that would probably happen down below 40% LVR. So it just depends on the client, how much money they're borrowing. Sometimes the lending institution, so some banks will have completely different policies to others. The other part that would come in is mortgage insurance. If that's involved, then you're going straight to a full valuation most of the time too.
Yeah, and with the desktop, the first couple you mentioned there, the desktop, obviously you don't know if it's a refinance. Different if it's on the market, you can get all that data and information with the pictures. Generally, although agents obviously generally put the good pictures up, not the bad pictures.
Yes.
You can get some data there, but if it's a refinance, I guess you don't always know what's going on in that property, how condition it is, whether they've renovated or not. So there must be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and so what we're doing there from an assessment point of view is working out whether the data we've got is rich enough to make that assessment. If it's not, essentially the job will get rejected, go back to the lending institution for them to decide whether it will be upgraded to a full valuation or not. Yeah, okay. It's don't want to alert people whether it's quite surprising how much data there is on individual properties throughout Australia, mainly because of the transaction cycle means that the data gets enriched each time there is a transaction on a property. Yeah.
Brendon, I know that in the mortgage industry, a lot of loans now are done by brokers. There's a bit of value shopping, shall I say. They'll search around, particularly in a refinance. Obviously, purchase price is a bit different, and sometimes the valuations do come out quite different. Yeah. And so, if I'm someone trying to assess value, and sometimes we've seen them $100,000+ difference on an $800,000 property. So, as a buyer, and how do you assess the value? It must be just a great challenge.
Yeah, so as valuers, most of the time we're getting the same data through in terms of making that valuation assessment. And as an industry, we're hoping that we're getting it right all the time, but you do get those outliers where potentially a valuer hasn't got the same data as the next valuer, and so you get those differentiations in numbers. In terms of consumers going to have a look at property, where they really want to start in particular is the area. So we're talking about the area of the land and the area of the house, or if we're in an apartment, the area of the actual living area of the apartment. So we're going to exclude balconies. In terms of dwellings, you're going to exclude things like al frescoes and porches and outdoor living areas. Same with the land area. So if you're using, say, your verge and that's where the cars get parked, that's not included in your title, then we're not going to include that in any assessment we're looking at. And so the consumer really wants to have a look at what's the underlying land value. Is that really obvious within the location? It can actually be a really big challenge for some locations, especially in inner city, big cities, where land areas are small, the rates per square metre go wildly out of control depending on the types of property that you're looking at. Generally though, in most suburbs in Australia, you can deduct some sort of underlying land value there to start with where's the value in this property.
Yeah.
Clearly, we then go to the house or the apartment dwelling and say, right, what's the quality of construction here? How big is it? How many bedrooms and bathrooms have we got? And what's the emotive part of the property? So what's the livability or the lifestyle that this house is bringing to the marketplace, and therefore how does that affect the value?
I know as a buyer's agent, we like to do the sum of the parts. So what's the land value and what's roughly the depreciated building value, as well as comparables. And do you, because we know the land is what goes up in value over time, the buildings fall away eventually. Yeah. Is that something valuers do? Obviously you look at comparables, but then do you do a sum of the parts check to make sure that that makes sense?
Yep. Yeah, so every valuation we do will work out a replacement cost for the house. People who've had a full valuation inspection would know that the valuer often measures the house or wants to see the plans that were used for construction of the dwelling. And so then we're working out what it would cost to replace on the day we're there effectively, and then we're depreciating it down from the current construction cost on the age of the dwelling. That usually gives us a pretty good idea, and essentially the technical people, the valuers watching this will be saying we're doing two methods of valuation. So that's the summation method of valuation, and then the other valuation methodology we're using is direct comparison. Yep.
So when you're getting down to the nitty gritty, you're going to a home open and someone says, oh, this one down the road sold for 800, for example, and this one they're chasing 700.
Yep.
But of course the other one might be a 4x2, this is a 3x1. How would a buyer, particularly as an investor, if it's your own home, obviously that's maybe slightly different, but how would a buyer assess what's that extra bedroom worth, or what's that extra bathroom worth? How do you do that?
Yeah, so it gets really difficult because it's not as straightforward as us just adding and subtracting numbers. The 3x1 could be 100 square metres and the 4x2 could be 200 square metres. So you really want to come back to that construction cost and understand that. And then you've got that emotive factor in the marketplace that says, well, there's just no way in the world I'm buying a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. In some markets, that becomes very much a land value proposition. So you need to have a look at what that added value of having a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom dwelling on there is. And often you'll look at, say, rental return. You know, this property the house is maybe rentable for the next few years. So I think the added value is X dollars because I think I can get a return of X dollars from the improvements on that site before maybe I knock it down and rebuild or do an extension and renovation. And same with the 4x2. So essentially you're looking at, is that adding me $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 because it has that amenity compared to the 3x1 down the road as well? Yeah.
And then coming into the locations within suburbs. So if I'm on a semi-busy road or a very busy road, my take as a guess was maybe 20% lower. What is a valuer, do you think, the exact same house on a very busy road versus a couple of streets back? How much is that different, do you think?
Well, that 10 to 20% is often what we'll find. What, as valuers, we really want to be able to analyse out the market and go back and look at some of the sales examples in those two different locations and just be sure that 20-odd%, that we've got a lot of rules of thumb working in the back of our head, that they are actually representative of what the market's prepared to pay. When a market goes up dramatically in value, we often see that discount gets squashed together. So people will pay more because they're desperate to be in a location, to be in that secondary location, i.e. the busy road, versus the quiet street.
Yeah. So Brendon, what data should a buyer ignore? Is there something out there you would say, look, that's just noise, I wouldn't pay attention to it? What should they ignore?
Yeah, so at the chance of being too parochial, I'd be really careful about the sales agent. They're always talking up the value, right? Their job is to maximise the value when they sell the place. So I'd just be careful about what they're presenting to you as to a guide on the value of this, in particular the property that they're selling. Often a good selling agent will have some sales in the location and have some of those brochures out. So that's what you want to take away and then confirm maybe with another agent or maybe with a neighbour that they're the sales prices for the location that you're in. Some of the media type cycle too is worth ignoring, and so by that I mean when a market is really active and really peaking out in values, you'll see a lot of the median house price type discussion around, and there you just need to be really careful of going shopping in a suburb. To use your $700,000 to $800,000 example, if the suburb has now suddenly jumped from $700,000 to $800,000 in median price, then you want to know why that's happened, and you don't want to go shopping and think, well, I have to pay $800,000 to live in this marketplace. You want to know what the top end of the range is and what you get for that money essentially.
Now, Brendon, lots of people like to do small-scale developments. It's quite sexy, and they want to tell their friends they're a developer, and that whether they buy a block to duplex, triplex, or even larger size. Does a valuer help clients with feasibility studies?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. We often get involved in the duplex, triplex and quadruplex developments when they get to the finance stage. And so what we find across Australia is that there is a different level of return that what we would call in our office mum and dad investors will accept for undertaking a development. And so essentially, sometimes we're not sure whether they're doing it for ego in terms of the answers we get on our feasibility studies. But yeah, we do a lot of work up front for clients where they want to understand what they're going to get in return once they've undertaken the development. The thing that we see most often is that people get very caught up in the gross realisation, as in, once you've sold unit number 1 and unit number 2, added together those two values are, let's say it's $1 million, and they think that means they're going to make $1 million. And so the methodology here is you need to make sure you go and take all of the costs out and find every single last cost to make sure that you work back to what is your profit and risk factor for undertaking that development. So yeah, we're always happy to help.
Yeah, I think I've seen some small-scale developers, they compare, well, this one sold for that, so I must be able to make money. And then they've come to us and they've said, I can't make any money on this. And I say, yeah, exactly right. Just because someone else paid a silly price for a block doesn't mean you should. And there's things like GST. People, if you're going to sell, people don't really understand GST,
absolutely,
holding costs. And I think the other thing that I've noticed in development, I'm sure you do when you're valuing these things, is there's quite a broad spread of range of values depending on the finishes and the quality, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. And so if you go and have a look at the end product in a suburb where development's taken off, in particular, I think there's a really common theme across capital cities in the country of townhouse type developments. And the difference between one townhouse and the next can be really dramatic in our marketplace. In particular, the luxury finish versus kind of that mid-level finish, where luxury finishes suddenly have things like lifts in them, European appliances, cabinetry that is just exponentially better than the one down the road. If you're selling into that market, developing in that market, or even buying into that market, you really want to understand the differences. Yeah.
I remember in my youth many years ago, which sadly is a long time ago now, I did a development and I met the market, knew what the finishes were, the higher ceilings and all those sort of things. I'll never forget someone else was doing a development 2 doors down, and they built to the lowest basic home builder, project builder spec. And this was quite an affluent suburb. And the trouble is you can't fix 2.4 metre height ceilings. You're stuck with that. Yeah. But even the kitchens and the bathroom, anyway, they couldn't sell them. Yes. And I just think that's something people should be aware of. If they're going into a market to develop, you can't just build something cheap because sometimes the market won't even accept it.
Yeah, and there's a real temptation across Australia. Construction costs are through the roof. They're potentially the highest in every single